the hair. Is that
No,
okay?
sure, do anything you want.
Just stick it.
Probably. Around. Thank you.
Okay. Whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, we can go?
Yeah.
Okay. So, over the past, I think, 5 years or maybe even longer, Center for Immediate Change has invested a lot in leadership development, change management, this kind of organization change process that you've been in. Can you say why? Sort of what is the rationale and kind of why have you invested so much in this one strategy?
Well, I think it has to do with having impact.
Can I just interrupt? Can you just start with saying the reason we've invested so
Oh,
much?
all right. The reason we've invested so much as an organization in the whole change process is really about impact, over the long term. And I think the work that we've done has been both at the individual level in terms of individual leadership, but also in terms of preparing the organization to take on the big challenges that are in front of us, work on immigration reform, work on poverty. I think without the work that we've done on the organizational change side, we just wouldn't be ready.
Yeah. Yes, I would add that another reason why we invested so much was in 2007 to 2009, we did an experiment, and to Mary's point about having leadership. At that time, we knew that our trajectory to impact the kind of change we wanted to make in this country was going to require us to have more depth and breadth in leadership. So we did an experiment, and we pulled about a quarter of our staff in a pilot leadership program. And it was a 15-month program where we fused a bit of Rockwood Art of Leadership, so we sent people to a week-long, and incorporated other skills training like strategic thinking and purposeful writing, and built community, right, among this group of people from all different parts of the organization. And what we learned is that even in our deep investment of these leaders in their transformation, we realized that we could go but so far because we needed the organization to also meet that level of reflection and learning. And so, if you can imagine, you have these people coming back from these retreats and training all like lit up, and they come back to a system that is in its steady state of what it's been, and doing amazing campaigns for affordable health care and immigration reform and what have you, that we couldn't maximize that gain. So that was a huge lesson coming out of our pilot leadership program, that individual transformation precedes organizational transformation, and the two need to, at its best optimal gain, go hand in hand. And I'll say that that learning was phenomenal, and the people we invested in have gone on to do amazing things.
Could you say more about, Mary, you say we wouldn't have been ready for the kinds of more ambitious campaigns that we took on had we not invested in the leadership and organization change. Could you say a little bit more about what that, the getting ready part, what people gained?
So I think that what people gained from the individual leadership work the panelists just described was a set of skills that equipped them better to handle their own leadership, to deal with their public presence in the world, to be able to work in concert with each other and with their teams. But the second phase of the work that we embarked on in 2010 was really about organizational change, and that was as important as the earlier phase. And that work involved both the board and the staff. And it had us really thinking together about what kind of organization we wanted to become and what were the values that undergirded our work. And so it became more of an organizational change effort that really kind of went through the whole organization, but particularly focusing on people who were in leadership or we were trying to move into leadership in the organization. And that, I think what that meant was that we had people who were increasingly ready to lead, which is not a small thing. And it meant that we were able to together think creatively, come up with a big new, big hairy audacious goal for the organization. We were able to think together about what kind of work we wanted to do in a bold and ambitious way. We were able to think about what kind of structures we would need to put in place to support that. And we could also think about some issues of organizational sustainability and financial modeling that allowed us to sort of step out into a bigger role on immigration, on retirement security, and increasingly on poverty. So those were some of the things that I think we tried to do.
I recall that the sort of name of your internal organization change effort was Scaling with Soul. Could you say a little bit about what that meant to you, what that meant to the organization, and why that name?
Well, I can tackle that. So Scale with Soul has to do with the fact that I think we recognized at the Center for Community Change that what we had been doing was good, but not good enough. And that for us to be able to achieve the kind of change that we wanted to see, that we had to be bigger and bolder. So that meant reaching more people, combining online organizing with some of the ground level grassroots organizing that the center traditionally had been involved in. But it also meant that the soul element had to be there, that we had to think in ways that really deeply engaged people who were part of our base. So a very good example of that is the work that we've done on immigration that led to the Keeping Families Together campaign, where at the core of our work has been the idea that family unification has to be key, and lifting up the stories of families who were affected by our broken immigration system has been really critical. And so that then has spawned a lot of work that has been very values-based, very focused on the people who actually, at the end of the day, need to be supported by an immigration system that works much better than what we've got now.
Could you share a story about how this work has made a difference?
Yeah.
Where you've seen the
Yeah.
impact?
That's a wonderful question. Where we've seen this work have an impact. So there are a couple stories, and I think we're just beginning to harvest some of them. So this is an exciting time, right? 3.5 years after or into our deep investment in transforming ourselves to transform society. Yeah. So one is you know, we can clearly see how we have contributed to leadership for the progressive sector. So even as we've invested in real people, in their personal leadership development, their ability to lead powerful and effective teams, you know, you can't guarantee that a person's going to stay with you forever, and that's not necessarily the litmus test. People have gone on to do and continue to do great things. One example is Marvin Randolph, who is on our staff and at the time was our National Director of Politics and was critical to our work in electoral organizing and building more power with local organizations. He moved on in, I think, 2011, to the NAACP, and that was a part of a conversation that we've been having in building deeper relations with the NAACP as their senior vice president of campaigns. And he is an amazing strategist around electoral politics, and he is the person who really helped to turn the NAACP around. They reached over 432,000 new voters in the 2012 election. I believe that's over 350% more than the 2008 election. I mean, that kind of impact that the NAA had never had before. And Marvin, in our deep investment in him and his sense of power and potential and possibility, got carried on and brought over there. I think all told, they turned out over 1,200,000 new and infrequent voters. And that was, I believe, over 220% gain from the 2008 election. So you can see, and you know, when you invest deeply in real people and connect them to what is their purpose, and invest in their ability to express that purpose wherever they need to be, that's a gain for all of us. And Marvin is shining brightly and working with them to really reimagine how they campaign, how they make change. And for us, that's a gain. Yeah. So that's one example. Another example of where we've seen the impact is precisely in our immigration campaign, in our Keeping Families Together campaign. And you know, one of the things around this kind of work is that you know, how we see the world and how we see things around us affects how what we create. Yeah. So if we have, for example, organizers seeing our communications team in an organization as a service arm, you know, get us our press, get us on TV, get us some print, and see a communications team as, you know, get us what we need, then that's all that gets created, right? And that's a common sort of dynamic we see in our organizations in the sector. And if a communications team sees programs and organizing functions as, oh, these are the people who come and ask us to do all these things for us, then that's just more of what they create. Give, get, right? And so over the course of retreats, training, intentional dialogues that we created between people and departments over the 3 years, people started to see themselves and each other differently. And such that last year in 2012, leaders from the communications team and our Fair Immigration Reform Movement staff team started to have conversation around what they could co-create together around a campaign that would move the immigration issue and move the hearts and minds of people in this country and really be authentically grounded in who we are and our values of creativity, compassion, and courage. And out of that was this powerful sense of we know that this is about families being separated. And our campaign needs to send a strong message of keeping families together. And so it seems so simple, and yet it was the conversations that they had with one another to say, oh, what you're presenting to me is something that I hadn't seen before. What I'm presenting to you is something I hadn't seen before. People started to see each other differently and imagine differently, such that we have a campaign that is not where DC sends to grassroots groups, here's your press packet and your talking points and yada, yada, yada. It's totally authentically grounded in the actual struggle. Which it seems so simple, but that's a breakthrough in tapping the potential that is there and just waiting to come out.
You've kind of alluded to it throughout your remarks, both of you, but could you kind of give an overview of what happened? What does this process look like? I mean, you started with individual leadership and it went to, could you just describe a little bit about what it is, for people who wouldn't know what this looked like in an organization, what does this look like?
Well, I would say that the process started in 2007 with the pilot leadership program that had 14 staff, people who were we saw as up-and-comers, people who could potentially take on more leadership within the organization, but who could really benefit from the kind of intensive leadership development that included working together as a team, but also included some individual leadership development. And so over the course of 15 months, there were retreats. People went through week-long Rockwood training. There was individual coaching. There was support for people's writing and some other forms of leadership development that we felt needed to be there, and some individual support that people needed, and that group has of people has some of them have stayed within CCC. Others have gone on to play important other roles within our broader ecosystem. And then in 2010, we began a process that really started with the realization that we'd come to that individual leadership change was critical but not sufficient, that we needed then to take on a change process that really built on that, but looked at the whole organization, looked at where we were going in terms of having a big goal, looked at the kind of change that would be needed at the leadership level of the organization, looked at how we would define our work, and then looked at some of these issues of organizational sustainability, financial and otherwise. And that work included important staff and board retreats. It included, in the summer of 2010, we did some pretty amazing small group work where every single person on the staff went through a session that we divided ourselves into, and really began to look at the trajectory of where the organization had come and began to tap into people's aspirations for the future, that led to ultimately the creation of the big, hairy, audacious goal for the organization. We began to work on organizational values, the creativity, compassion, courage values, the CCC values that eventually were adopted by the whole organization. And we, over time, began to lay the groundwork for a new structure of leadership within the organization, where Deepak Bhargava and I, who had been playing a pretty central role in running the organization, decided that it was critical to have a broader set of people who were sharing leadership within the organization, and that's the work that we're so engaged in doing right now, is bringing the leadership structures that we've set up forward, and continuing to invest in the people who have been brought onto those, as well as their teams.
What is your big, hairy, audacious goal?
You want to go?
I don't know that I can
Oh.
articulate it so succinctly.
So
Yeah.
the goal is that CCC by 2020 will invest in the leadership of low-income people of color to bring about the change that we see we see as needed in the world around bringing grassroots movements to affect the change we want, which is that everyone has enough to thrive. Let me do that again.
Okay.
All right. The big, hairy, audacious goal that we've set for ourselves is that by the year 2020, CCC will have committed to bringing into being grassroots movements, particularly in low-income communities of color, that will result in everyone in the U.S. having enough to thrive.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the challenges, the bumps that have been in the road, and what has been most meaningful to you about this work?
Wanna go?
Yeah. Well,
You both can answer.
yeah. I my mind was still on the previous track for a moment.
Did you want to say? Did you want to
I did, but that's okay. We'll come back to it. So, some of the challenge of doing this kind of work is that it's not as if everything stops and that we operate in a vacuum and we can create what we want to create. So, an organization like the Center for Community Change, who really cares about results, and we really pay a lot of attention to what we do and what we choose to do, bringing about real meaningful change in this country. We face, like many in all our organizations, this issue of organizational load, or simply put, sort of capacity to have any space, empty space, to think differently, to reflect, to stop and learn about what we're doing and how do we rethink it or take on the best practices and go forward. We do some of that, but the kind of transformational work that we engage in really can go so much farther when there's a lot more space for people to do that. We found creative ways to make that happen, and I think that's actually a gain in the challenge, right? That it made us use those 2 or 3 day staff retreats or 1 day session with a particular team really high value, really get people beyond the reacting to the moment and the fluff to dropping in and into a place of discovering themselves and each other. So it on the upside, it actually got us to get right to the point, and get people to reveal more about themselves than maybe they would have otherwise. Reveal what they're struggling with. Reveal how they're, or reveal how they recommit and re-enroll into a high-paced campaign for immigration reform every time they're involved in another action with leaders. Yeah.
Then we've got like 2 minutes.
Okay. Should I put
You
it
want
to
to-
advice?
I think it's just wherever they have energy.
Do you have anything that you want to, I was going to ask you what advice you have for other organizations that might want to take on this kind of work? What advice might you have?
I think every organization is different, but what I would say is that this work is critically important. I've been involved in running organizations for the last 30-some years, and I feel like I've learned a lot and gained a lot from going through the process of organizational change. But it has required real commitment on the part of the leadership of our organization. It's required making the time consistently to keep at it. It's not something that happens episodically, or you don't go away for one retreat and solve the problem and you're done. It really means that you've got to work at it and create the time and space. And with that, I think addressing the issue that Pamela mentioned of people's loads to be able to see this as an important organizational priority is pretty critical. Otherwise, I think any organization will falter.
Yeah. There's one thing I want to speak to with respect to this work is that we took a certain approach that may or may not be the case for other organizations, right? Our organizational change project, so to speak, was essentially to reimagine the Center for Community Change, right? To go from being good to being great, right? And our premise on the pathway to get there, to get us to the almost mental, emotional, and physical state of reimagining ourselves, meant that we needed to shift our way of thinking. We needed to shift our mindsets, right? We needed to create an experience that was generative for people, and that's why we took the approach we did of deep investment in individual and leadership development and sense of team and team development, so that we could open people up and from that spark so much creativity and to Mary's point earlier, aspiration. If people were committing themselves for another 5 years to this kind of an organization, what would they really want it to be and do, right? And how would we go about doing that work with one another? So that was our approach and our premise, and I think it has really worked for us, because now it situates us on this next stage of our transformation of a very ambitious and exciting shared and distributed leadership. Going from 2 people to 10 people in an executive team and a management team of 15. That's a powerful thing to present to the progressive sector, who's very used to an executive director and then, say, a deputy or a managing director, and that's all that people want to talk to, particularly, say, in the funding world. And we're going to just squish that and present that we actually have competent and powerful and effective leaders at every level of the organization, and here's how. Yeah.
That's a wonderful way to end.
Or where you have to end.
We do.
Okay.
Ray and Alec are waiting.
Okay. Thank you so much.
This is great.
It's kind of a fun exercise to, try to articulate this and